A gentle nudge wasn't enough, so now comes the big push to oust South Africa's president of 9 years. The new leadership of the ruling ANC making it clear it will go through will bring up a vote of no confidence if that's what it takes to trigger Zexit, the departure of Jacob Zuma, who, unlike Robert Mugabe in neighboring Zimbabwe, won't be rewarded with a national holiday in his name, in a sign that the wrangling over his legal battles may not get Zuma very far. The raid early Wednesday at the estate of the powerful Gupta family, Indian-born businessmen accused of buying Zuma's services and, in one instance, of picking cabinet members. What does it all say about today's South Africa, 20 years after the retirement of Nelson Mandela? After Zuma, will the only party in power since the end of apartheid restore the Rainbow Nation's standing? Or could the ANC and could South African politics in general splinter between multiracial liberals and black nationalists? Is South Africa still a model for the region and the continent? Today in the France 24 debate, we are looking at the countdown to Zexit, and with us from Pretoria, Cheryl Hendricks, chair of the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Francois.
We also want to welcome to the show Beauregard Trump. He is the deputy editor of the Mail and Guardian newspaper. Thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Here in the studio, South African DJ and music producer Mo Loudy. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
And South African businesswoman Karina Wally is with us as well.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag F24debate. Jacob Zuma says it's unfair. Why the rush? Adding he will go if it is put to a vote of parliament. Alexander Alcott has more.
People are saying Zuma must go. My problem was that it's not a new thing.
The South African president breaking his silence amid mounting pressure from within his own party to step down. In a rambling 45-minute conversation on state television, he said he'd done nothing wrong and was being victimized.
What is the problem? I don't understand. Now, if you think we are going to be agreeing on this one, then I have a problem with your approach and decision, because I don't agree with it. I don't think it is fair. I think it is unfair.
But the ANC has called time on further talks with a scandal-tainted head of state and is set to use a parliamentary vote on Thursday to force him out, and could elect his party rival Cyril Ramaphosa as president as early as Friday.
We are now proceeding with, as the chief whip, to proceed with the motion of no confidence tomorrow in Parliament, so that President Zuma is then removed so that we can proceed to elect President Ramaphosa.
Wednesday's events also come as an elite police unit stormed the compound of the Gupta family. Prominent business associates of Zuma, who are accused of being at the centre of corruption scandals that have infuriated the country, hurt the ANC's popularity and weakened the economy.
Beauregard Trump, what did you make of that long interview that was broadcast on SABC, the public broadcaster?
Well, firstly, for this impromptu interview to take place, it smacked of desperation for me. This is not the kind of move that we would see Jacob Zuma, the one who's fully in control, to make. He's not the kind of move he would make usually. So that was the first thing. The second thing is, he's speaking with a forked tongue here. He's saying that I disagree with the decision, but I am not actually I'm not following suit here. And so what he's doing is you don't know exactly what he's trying to say. Is he going to agree and he's going to resign, or he's not? And from the interview, it seems like he's saying he's not. So he is then, in essence, then defying his party, which is not what is expected of him.
Defying his party, Mo Loudy, what's the mentality inside of his core, among his core supporters right now, you think?
It's very surprising because, at the beginning you had everybody running behind Zuma, and now since there's a new leader, the power has shifted. Everybody's running away from the ship, and the ship is sinking. So
everybody's running away?
Yeah. And so that's the core supporters. So his support has completely eroded. So it's no surprise. So now he just trying to cling on to power as much as he can. So he said he wants just a few months. I think he just wants to go out gracefully without being pushed out.
What kind of bargaining power does he have, Cheryl Hendricks? Because if it is brought to a vote of no confidence in Parliament, that's it. He's out.
He will be out. I think that part of today as well was to try and cause disarray tomorrow by trying to portray that he was reasonable, that he does not understand why they would not have accepted 3 months because he would have resigned, etc. He was trying to bring about unity. So he was portraying himself as the person who had the interest of the ANC at heart. And he's hoping that that then would cause some of his old supporters to think twice about how they vote tomorrow.
And could there be disarray? Because after all, this is a vote of no confidence that was tabled by the EFF opposition party. That's got to make some inside the ANC uncomfortable to have to be voting with the opposition.
They have expressed that they are uncomfortable with it, but I think that his time is up, that the ANC has taken a decision. They seem very resolute about this, and that tomorrow he will be voted out.
Karina Wally, the way it's unfolded, we thought he'd be out at the beginning of the week, and it's now finally happening. Why is he still clinging to power?
From what I understand, what I've been reading, my favorite site is the Daily Maverick, which gives a whole lot of insight on the real inside story. They've been saying that obviously it's the deal with the Russians on the nuclear plant that is making Zuma cling on to power. So he just wants to stay long enough to make sure that deal goes through.
That deal, we heard the incoming president already say that deal is not going to happen to build a nuclear plant in South Africa.
And I think that's at that point in Davos, when Ramaphosa did say he was against, South Africa doesn't have the money, we've got excess power, we don't need the nuclear deal. I think that's when Zuma really started digging in and becoming defiant and making sure that he
Why over that?
Because it's such a big, I think his son's implicated with the Guptas, sorry. And so everyone's involved, and he's obviously got a lot to gain, and I think he's very scared also. Yeah, he's got a lot to lose if the deal doesn't go through, plus all the corruption allegations against him that'll finally come to bear once he has to step down.
Beauregard Trump, you agree that that's the reason why he's digging his heels in?
Look, I think that's a bit far-flung and very speculative. And as a newspaper, we try not to, go into the realm of, we don't play that far outside the borders. The one thing that I do agree with is the many charges which are still up in the air, and he needs the protection which the presidency offers him, because what he has done as president of this country is he's not only centralized power within himself in the ANC, but he also centralized power largely within the executive, within his own person. And so he's been able to manipulate organs of state, a number of organs of state, which are supposed to keep him in check. And so without him actually having the office of the presidency, there are so many cases which he's been able to avoid for his entire 9 years in the presidency. And with him out of power, it's a lottery for him, and he doesn't like it that way.
All right, and that brings us to the other big event of the day, with that raid on a luxury compound in the Johannesburg area, the homes of the Gupta family, the Indian-born businessman under investigation over allegations the three brothers had corrupt links with Zuma. They've employed, by the way, 2 of his sons, 4 of his wives, and under his presidency, times have been good for the Guptas, with state contracts in mining, media, rail ports, pipelines, energy. News of the swoop comes amid media reports of at least 2 arrests and neighbors scratching their heads.
Excuse me, officers, there are no liquor licenses. I hope that any hidden secrets may come to the surface, and that will give a lot of people in our country a bit of peace of mind, hopefully, and the hope that moving forward with South Africa will be a bit of an easier task.
Beauregard Trump, what do you make of the timing of this swoop? Investigators say it's got nothing to do with the political timeline.
That's complete rubbish. I was around there this morning, and it was quite a circus. And for me, it's astounding, the fact that we are seeing, this is exactly what I'm talking about, the organs of state, like the Hawks, which is a specialized investigative unit in the police force, like the National Prosecuting Authority. These are the organs of state which are supposed to hold everybody accountable. And now suddenly realizing that, Ubaba's time is up, and now they're actually doing the job that they were supposed to do all along. There was so much evidence which largely journalists have uncovered, investigative journalists in this country, real evidence that was prosecutable, and they did not act. And now we're finally seeing some action. So the wind has turned completely.
The wind has turned completely. What's going to happen? You heard that one neighbor saying there that she hopes everything comes to light. What's going to come to light in your view?
Look, at this point in time, they're focusing on a dairy farm project, which was a clumsy attempt at robbing the state, which it was easier to actually find the fingerprints of those involved, which included people like Atul Gupta, one of the Gupta brothers, and then other senior people within government. So this is low-hanging fruit. And there are many other cases of, contracts involving the state power utility, and very many state-owned enterprises which they have enriched themselves with, of course, with the help of the president himself.
Cheryl Hendricks, is this a Zuma problem or is this an ANC problem?
It's an ANC problem, but it's also wider than the ANC. It's part of how our state, the post-colonial state, has been configured so that access to wealth, accumulation of wealth, is largely through your proximity to the state. And any party coming in is going to have to face that challenge and deal with it right on. I do want to indicate the party why Zuma doesn't want to resign. Here's the corruption scandals. Here's he's scared about what would happen to him afterwards. But there's also the being a bit drunk on power, the personalized power that he's been able to build up when he says he does not understand why he must go now. It is because through those 8 motions, these very people have supported him, told him that he's done nothing wrong. Some are still telling him that he's done nothing wrong. And he then cannot understand that shift that has taken place because he did not have the proper advice, very similar to Thabo Mbeki in 2008.
Very similar to Thabo Mbeki, who eventually did agree, Karina Whaley, to fall on his Wally to fall on his sword. How much has South Africa changed in those 9 years? Since
Zuma took power, to be honest, I actually haven't been living in South Africa for much of that period, but just from the exterior, it's been really sad to watch what's happened. There was so much hope after Mandela and Mbeki, and the economy was doing really well. And then, you can see with the GDP figures, the recession that's happened, inequality, I feel like it's got worse. Educational, social reform, it just hasn't really moved. So yeah, for me, everything's kind of deteriorated.
Molaudi, everything has deteriorated. Can it all be redressed now under the leadership of the same party that's been in power since the end of apartheid?
I seriously doubt that there will be a major change. It'll be minute. There'll be a new rebirth of the ANC. There'll be a new energy, but still it's still the same mentality of being much more closer to the capital rather than being close to the people and building houses and making education free. So I don't see how it's going to be a huge amount of change from that.
not going to be a huge amount of change. That mentality then that Cheryl Hendricks is talking about of patronage politics runs a lot deeper than just Jacob Zuma or the ANC.
Yes, it's very deep. I mean, all across the world that's how politics works. The proximity to power allows you to gain on your business. So you have a lot of people that have cling to power, and that's what they use, and that's how South Africa works in many countries.
Yeah.
Can I just say, what I do think is that Ramaphosa has given a lot of hope to all South Africans. Even I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but like a lot of the white community was traditionally supporting the DA, the Democratic Alliance, one of the opposition parties. But because of how badly they've handled the drought situation in Cape Town, and because of now Ramaphosa coming to the forefront of the ANC, I think there's a lot of movement towards the ANC, even from the white community. So yes. I think there's a lot of...
Which is very interesting because a large community of the black community, they feel very disadvantaged still, especially from what I've said previously about the Marikana situation, where Marikana, Ramaphosa coming from a union perspective and then switching over to be one of the guys that own the mine, and he's one of the people. Yeah,
and there was that brutal crackdown and
yes,
with police shooting at picketers. Beauregard Trump, you were saying earlier how because we just heard some of the panelists talking about patronage politics. It's something that happens everywhere. Of course, South Africa is exceptional in a lot of ways on the continent. And you yourself were mentioning a short while ago how investigative journalism has brought a lot of this stuff to light. Is South Africa an exception still, or is it just another African country?
Well, I mean, look, I think every country on our continent is unique in terms of its politics, its social dynamics, everything else. And of course, South Africa is unique on the continent and the world. So, it would be impossible. We cannot compare this country to any other country in the world in terms of how it deals with its problems. I mean, the overriding thing which still defines our society is race. We've never had any rainbow nation. There has been very little redress. Patronage politics is born out of black people trying to enrich themselves because they don't have access to capital. Because a lot of the capital in this country historically was and remains in the hands of white individuals.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you very briefly, Beauregard, because we have to take a very quick break. We're going to pick up on that point of whether or not it is a rainbow nation. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate.
French Connections, presented by Florence Villeminot.
They're known for their cuisine and saying hello with a kiss. They only work 35 hours per week, when they're not on strike, that is. How true are these clichés about France? Every week, Florence Villeminot tears apart stereotypes. Join us for insight into French culture and current events to understand what makes the French so unique.
French Connections on France 24 and France24.com. Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
On June the 5th, 1967, the Israeli army invaded Egyptian Sinai, unleashing a war that would change the face of the Middle East. During the Six-Day War, Israel took rapid possession of the Golan Heights, the West Bank and the Old City of Jerusalem, holy sites for Jews, Muslims and Christians alike. It's a stranglehold that the Israeli authorities have maintained to this day.
The Temple Mount and the Western Wall will forever remain under Israeli sovereignty.
50 years later, East Jerusalem still symbolizes the ascendancy of Israel, whose settlements policy has created tensions which are as strong today as ever and make the atmosphere in Jerusalem unique in the world.
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, the stories that Laura Cellier will be following for you in the newsroom at the top of the hour. Jacob Zuma branding as unfair his ANC party's decision to put the recall of South Africa's president to a vote of parliament Thursday, Zuma forcing the vote but adding he will abide by its outcome. The fixer who housed two of the Paris attackers cleared of aiding and abetting the cell during the manhunt that ensued. Jawad Ben Daoud's two co-defendants both convicted and sentenced to hard time. Israel's prime minister defiant after a police report that recommends drawing up Benjamin Netanyahu on bribery charges. Netanyahu says the case is full of holes like Swiss cheese. And Paris Saint-Germain are at the Bernabeu to take on Real Madrid, first leg of the last 16 in the Champions League. They're hoping that now that Neymar has made the move from Barcelona to PSG, that they can reverse their bad fortunes of last year in the knockout phase of the competition. Kedaman Gorgistani will have all the day's sports. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're counting down what could now be hours and no longer days until Jacob Zuma is forced out as South Africa's president of 9 years. The ANC moving forward a motion of no confidence in Parliament that will be taking place on Thursday. With us to talk about it from Pretoria, Cheryl Hendricks, chair of the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Also from Johannesburg, Beauregard Trump, deputy editor of the Mail and Guardian. Welcome back as well to music producer and DJ Mo Loudy, who's with us, as well as South African businesswoman Karina Wally. Before the break, we were talking about how this all puts the African National Congress at a crossroads. The ANC, which predates Nelson Mandela. Can the party be true to its heritage? Alex Jennings takes a look back.
April 27th, 1994. Nelson Mandela votes in South Africa's first multiracial election. He wins the presidency in a sweeping victory for the ANC. But behind Mandela's success are years of struggle against the apartheid, a struggle that began before the man known as Madiba was even born in 1912. In 1991, he takes the helm of the ANC and just 3 years after becomes the first black president of South Africa. In 1997, Mandela hands the reins to Thabo Mbeki, who succeeds him as the country's leader. But the Mbeki presidency is marked with a rise in crime, unemployment and the spread of AIDS. In 2008, with 9 months left of his term as president, he obeys his party's calls to resign. Then enters Jacob Zuma. Charismatic and populist, he takes on the party's leadership in 2009. The president faces numerous high-profile scandals centred largely on allegations of corruption. Protected by members of the ANC, however, Zuma manages to survive 8 motions of no confidence. In December 2017, Zuma's deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, takes the ANC's top job. The multi-millionaire businessman knows the party is losing momentum and runs on a ticket vowing to fight the corruption that dogged Zuma's presidency. After a 13-hour-long meeting, the African National Congress make their call. Jacob Zuma must give up his duties as President of the Republic. A year away from the presidential election, Nelson Mandela's party seems more fragile than ever. Their former fight for equality, already a distant memory.
Cheryl Hendricks, you penned a piece in The Conversation where you write that South African exceptionalism on the continent is dead, and that starting, you date back to 2007, the period of 2007 to 2010, it became, well, just another African nation. Why is that?
I think we need to understand what we mean by South African exceptionalism. When in the apartheid era, we were talking about liberation, part of the discussion was whether we were a colonial state or not, whether it was a race issue or a class issue. South Africans at the time said that this was not a classic colonial state, that class was the dominant issue, and that then going into the post-apartheid state could have certain consequences for the way in which we shape ourselves, i.e. that we would not have some of the challenges of other post-colonial states. So we're not saying that South Africa is not unique or other countries are not unique. We're talking about a structural basis of a particular state. And what we're saying then is that some of the outcomes, the political and economic outcomes, are very similar to other African states, not just African states, other post-colonial states. So we see the factionalism, the fracturing of parties. We see the nationalism. We see the chauvinism. We start off with non-racialism, but we have shifted towards a narrow nationalism. And that is what we mean by not that exceptional any longer. I think we need to understand the argument there. Now, in 1994, given the nature of our transition, which was portrayed as a peaceful transition to a non-racial democracy, we held the moral high ground, not just in Africa, but in the world. We were going to show new ways of living together, reconciliation, forgiveness, etc. 23 years down the line, we have to question ourselves whether we have been able to deliver on that promise. Our conflict management systems that we exported to the rest of the world, they too now are showing to be fracturing. And this is what I'm saying when I talk about we need to look at what we're doing, but that the part of the answer to this is that we align ourselves and think through this together in South Africa through national dialogues and together with other African states so that we get to the Pan-African agenda that is supposed to have animated all of our liberation movements, including the African National Congress, and to see in that part of the solution to the structural crisis that we face.
So the solution is partly domestic and partly abroad. Let's first talk about or how South Africa deals with things on the international stage. Before we talk about that portion of it, though, Beauregard Trump, your thoughts on whether or not, as you just heard, Cheryl Hendricks was saying that that South African exceptionalism has been lost along the way. After all, we're talking about an ANC party now where it already has a left flank with the EFF opposition party, which is a spin-off, a black nationalist, calling for many of the things that Robert Mugabe had once espoused, like the confiscation of land. With the departure of Jacob Zuma, that rare coming together that Mo Lowdy described in part one of our discussion, is that just going to be a brief moment in time before the splintering continues?
Sorry, I'm not aware of this coming together business that you're speaking of. Having lived in this country and grown up under apartheid and being privileged to have voted in our first election, and now as a black man in democratic South Africa, I still feel that the disunity in our country is still very stark. And we are reminded of that by a younger generation who are more vociferous than we were. And they're essentially pointing fingers at us and telling us, you did not do enough. And so I think this is, and part of this is a reality check for all of us. And another part of it is a maturation of our democracy, where we're seeing a great many more voices, great many more mature voices, and also South Africans taking charge of their narrative, not speaking to an ideal narrative which has been put out there for, I think, in part for the international community. What we need to be concerned about more, I think, is what is our story, a unique, genuine story, which informs us and which can lead us and take us forward. And that is what is happening now. And some of it will be ugly, some of it will be a little bit dirty, but in the long run, it will stand us in very good stead.
Yeah, because when you say that the younger generation is more vociferous, what do you mean?
I'm saying that, look, the thing is media, especially in South Africa, is largely the domain of a middle class and the upper middle classes. And what we are seeing now is we're seeing a larger number of that we're seeing a larger number of participants, a wider array of participants. You don't have those black individuals who stand out in the crowd. There are many more now. They are more present, more reflective of our country. And there's a different reality, which is a more sincere reality, which is being demonstrated now.
Molau, do you agree?
Definitely. Yes, there's, since the end of apartheid, there's been this euphoria of the Rainbow Nation, and a lot of people do believe in that, but still there's a lot of issues that haven't been addressed. And now you have the younger population that are addressing these issues with their education. That's why you saw movements like Fees Must Fall, and many movements where they address issues, and you still find that most of the land is still controlled by the 1% or the 20%, and a lot of people still don't have the land. And we were given this narrative of the Rainbow Nation, but there's not a narrative of the youth, of the children from the townships that were hungry, and then now where's the jobs?
Yeah, because Karina Wally, the man who's replacing Jacob Zuma, well, he's 65 years old, and he's from the nomenclatura of the ANC. Is that the person who's going to meet the aspirations of that younger generation?
I think so. I mean, I think he's. I mean, you talk about Ramaphosa. I mean, he's run the gamut. I mean, he was a unionist. He's been a really successful businessman. He's just a very natural leader. I think for me, he's an ideal leader.
Mo Laudi?
Well, I would love to believe so, and but that has been the trend of many unionists that eventually transfer to power, and they tend to be leaning much more towards the capital and the business rather than restructuring the community in a way that the children, the youth will be able to gain a lot more.
Because is there a middle ground between what was the Mugabe medicine, which was to nationalize the land and scare away capital in some instances?
He just wants to keep the capital.
Or, a system that keeps it as it is right now. Is there a middle way?
I hope they can find a middle way, but the way that the things are going, he's much more closer to the business, and it's not going to change a lot. So what we need to find is a middle way where the ownership can be into the workers, all the workers find shares into the companies that they work in, rather than just being, slaves to the companies.
But Beauregard Trump?
Mm-hmm. One of the things one of the myths I want to dispel is when we speak about the land, I think many people mistake that for always physically meaning a piece of earth. We don't all want to run out and be farmers. Most of us don't even know how to farm. What we're talking about here is agency, a recognition of self, a recognition of a person, that I was here, I did something in this world, on this earth. Not just that I grew up poor, I died at the age of 30-something, and nobody knew I was even here. And that is unfortunately the reality for too many, I think. So for me, we actually created a beat called The Land. And for us, when we interrogated what that would mean, it's really about agency. It's about having a voice, being heard, being recognized.
Cheryl Hendricks, you were mentioning earlier how part of the solution going forward is for South Africa to rethink its place internationally. What do you mean by that?
Just firstly, I think I agree with the previous speaker. For South Africans, it's not necessarily about acquiring a piece of land. Many of them, for them, it's about dignity, restoring their humanity, that rehumanization that almost has to take place. And it's about a redistribution of resources at large. And I think we need to understand that. For South Africa, to restore its place internationally. And we were punching way above our weight for a very long time. We have to restore our credibility. We have to restore our legitimacy. And it's not too late to do that. We were part of the norm and agenda setting internationally, continentally, and regionally that gave rise to the African Union, a revamped SADC, for example. The issues around the UN Security Council, I think in particular around 1325. So what we need to do is have a new vision, I think, that takes us forward. We are still polarized. We are not in agreement about how that redistribution, for example, needs to take place. So there's a larger conversation that needs to happen in South Africa for what the future vision is for this particular country that then situates us internationally as well.
Yeah, and one of the aspects is how South Africa deals with the immigrants who come to South Africa to work. When the France 24 debate went to Nigeria in 2015, it was at the time where there were anti-immigrant riots, and people were angry at South Africa then.
It's that chauvinism, that narrow nationalism that I refer to. So we saw the xenophobia that emerged in South Africa. And that comes from apartheid days. And when we say South Africans thought of themselves as different, it's coming from a long time ago. Part of that was also to distinguish ourselves from the rest of Africa. And so you hear Africans here also still asserting that they are different. They are going to Africa is a common way in which they express themselves here. And so it's about resituating who we are, finding our identity. I still think we are very schizophrenic in this particular country.
Do you feel schizophrenic at times, Karina Wally?
No comment.
How about you, Mo?
No, not at all. I'm very proud of being a South African, and I truly understand. It's there's that feeling of many South Africans that they do not identify themselves as African. You know, they see Zimbabweans and Nigerians as totally different, and so, of course, it needs to be addressed, and there needs to be conversation about identity, how you fit into society, you know, how white people and black people get together. Like this conversation needs to, you know, grow and be much more.
And of course, when you look at it internationally, Beauregard Trump, right, these days, a lot of the comparisons are between South Africa and neighboring Zimbabwe, which just chased out its independence leader, Robert Mugabe, and where, though, the same ruling party is still in power, I see that there's been a lot of comparisons in the past week between Zuma and Mugabe. How many comparisons, though, can you draw?
I wouldn't draw any comparison. I mean, that would be like comparing the USA to Canada. Or have you ever heard anybody compare the USA to Mexico? I mean, that's just crazy. Why would you even think that? And the other thing is Zimbabwe has gone through they've been a democratic country for a much longer period. I mean, they had something like a 20-year head start on us. Well, not quite, but, you know, so it's very difficult to draw comparisons. I mean, look, there are similarities when we look across the global south, but I think it's dangerous to start making comparisons because of our physical proximity to another country.
Yeah, but both nations are in a similar position right now with new leaders coming in from old parties.
Well, I mean, the party's been in power since 1994. I suppose one could probably make comparisons with other South American countries in Europe. I mean, how long was Thatcher in power? You know what I'm saying? It's for me, making these kinds of comparisons are foolish, and it's a colonial kind of thinking. I just don't see the reason for actually going down that road. They went and fought a completely different struggle in their country. Their democracy evolved at a different pace, a different rate. Their society is very much different to ours. Yes, we had the same colonizer, but we had more than one colonizer. You know, there's just so many disparities between the two countries. It really is impossible to make the comparison.
And one final question for you, Beauregard. Jacob Zuma, after he leaves office, how is he going to fare when with all those allegations coming towards him? Are they just going to pin everything on him?
He's going to fare very poorly, I expect, because what we have at the moment is we see the culmination of a number of court cases that he's actually tried to avoid and tried to avoid for a very long time. And so some of it is incidental, that it's actually coming to fruition now that, I mean, the NPA has got a case against him where he faces 783 charges of fraud and etc., which and the decision is being made, if I'm correct, on the 23rd of February in that.
22nd.
And
yeah.
of course, 22nd of February. So there's a number of charges which he will be facing. Look, he will still enjoy the financial support of the state in defending those charges as a past president, as is written in our constitution. But he is in for a very rough ride for the next couple of years.
All right, and that'll be our final word. Beauregard Trump, I want to thank you for joining us from Johannesburg. Cheryl Hendricks in Pretoria, Mo Lowdy, Karina Wally. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So a quick look at the South African press and what's being said on social media about all of the drama. The Citizen, which I think is the second biggest daily paper in South Africa, headlines "The Long Goodbye," and I think in their editorial they've been. Well, they're a little bit exasperated by the sounds of things, and they talk about a national tragedy for the party, the ANC, and for a large part of the population in the way in which Jacob Zuma is hanging on to power. They say that in choosing to go as he's going, that he should change his habits over the past 10 years and at least depart in a dignified manner. Elsewhere, well, actually, a lot of papers are sort of just taking the same angle, if you like. This is the Times of South Africa, and that's actually a quote from an ANC MP by the name of Philly Mapulane, and she tweeted this afternoon, having watched the long TV interview, and she actually had concerns about his mental health, and you can see there that the language she used was pretty strong: deranged, psychotic, insane. Elsewhere, this is...
rambling's the word that I saw come up.
That's right. This is the Mail and Guardian, and I guess that's an editorialised headline, but maybe it's just factual. Maybe it just was rambling, no matter what way you look at it. Meanwhile, Le Point, in its Africa section, has been talking about this as well, and they say that he is imposing on himself a sort of humiliation by going forward tomorrow for this vote of confidence or no confidence. Now, there's some cartoons as well that look rather morbid, I think is the right word for it.
Okay, so these are the opposition parties here.
Yes, exactly. And so I think a picture speaks 1,000 words there. Elsewhere, we have a new spelling for the word defiant. Defiant. So there you go. I think there seems to be a sort of a consensus, really, on social media. I'm sure there are some, obviously, voices in favour of Jacob Zuma, but they're
Photoshop.
Less audible. So you can see, I think, that the sort of thread running through all of this is clinging on to power. This is a slightly different take on things. The proverbial cat has 9 lives. Tomorrow, President Zuma will face the 9th motion of no confidence, with the hashtag that is gathering much of the comment Zexit. Will we ever get away from these exit hashtags? Anyway, I wish all these political parties can be united like they are now, not only in removing President Jacob Zuma, but to benefit this country as well and put aside their hidden agendas. In other words, it's great to have unity, and it would be nice to see this unity around other issues as well. Similar remark on this particular tweet. Uniting political parties since the 14th of February 2018. And I believe that's Valentine's Day. And I'll just finish with this little note. After Zuma, let's not elect another president. We should just be single for a few years. to recover from all of this. I'll leave out the last word. But it's true that you shouldn't rush straight into another relationship. I think that's what that's the received wisdom.
All right, many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Yeah, that's a Valentine's Day.